across a lot of different avenues of education. So I'm James Brown, Executive Director of the STEM Education Coalition. And again, welcome to our first webinar of this new year, of this new Congress and a new presidential administration. We've got a panel of folks across a variety of different areas, K-12, higher education, people who work in companies, people who deal with workforce issues. We've got people with classroom experience, all the different areas that you might have concerns and interests in across the whole STEM spectrum. And so just to get things started, let me just first recognize our sponsors for today's briefing. That's Girl Start, the Society of Women Engineers, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, the American Chemical Society, Texas Instruments, the Afterschool Alliance, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and Universal Technical Institute. So thank you to all of our sponsors for today's briefing. And let me first start this off by turning it over to Kevin Anderson, who is President of the Council of State Science Supervisors. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time for this important discussion on STEM education. I'm grateful to be here talking with you all today. Seeing that science and STEM education have honestly been a struggle during COVID. And so I'm going to share a few slides and a few ideas and dig into some of the ways that things have been a struggle, and also dig into some ideas for federal government's policy and practice to support STEM education, now and beyond COVID. So pulling up a couple slides. Namely, first of all, not a big surprise, and I know there's initiatives going on, but we need better broadband access, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Second, instruction. I have seen some fabulous instruction going on during COVID. We've seen innovative ideas. People have to be innovative with all these shifts, but we honestly need more federal support to create quality instructional materials and the related professional learning on this quality instruction. The virtual teaching tools that I see teachers using are, I would say, relatively easy to learn how to implement, but the solid, effective teaching is not as easy to implement. And we generally lack materials in the science and STEM spaces that meaningfully integrate disciplines and truly include thoughtful projects that connect to local communities. And many teachers that I talk to don't know how, or feel like they can't, adapt the materials that they have to connect to the local issues in order to better engage their kids. And finally, I want to emphasize that there have absolutely been success stories. The struggle has been productive, and educators deserve immense appreciation and praise. For example, some schools are sending STEM equipment home. They're having kids pick up STEM equipment to do hands-on labs when they come and pick up a lunch. They're doing collaborative projects that integrate disciplines. And I've seen innovative uses of outdoor spaces. But it's clear that hybrid and virtual spaces have honestly not been as effective as in-person learning is for most students. And new tech tools alone isn't going to solve the challenges that we're seeing. So a few thoughts on what's needed in the policy space. First, advocacy is key. We need to bring back the White House Science Fair, or maybe even rebrand that as a STEM fair, and just celebrate children doing science and STEM. Anytime we can get the president doing that with kids, it's inspiring for people. And along those lines, we need to do a better job at celebrating STEM teachers, such as the winners of the White House's Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. So second, we need an upper level STEM education coordinator at the Ed Department. So this person would be absolutely critical for coherence across federal agencies and with coordinators of STEM ed at OSTP. So in Wisconsin, as a case in point, Wisconsin is where I work in the science and STEM space. We don't have a state person with the official title or official role of coordinating STEM. And we've remained fairly discombobulated in our STEM effort across the state because of that. So like in Wisconsin, we need legislative action to create such a position. So we need somebody who can really pull together a one-stop shop of federal STEM education support. It's too difficult right now for educators to navigate all that's happening across different federal agencies and figure out where to find the best tools and resources. Next up, elementary education needs to be a priority. Elementary STEM education, in particular, STEM and science. Children often develop a STEM identity in those years. And if we don't get them during those age ranges, really seeing themselves as a STEM person, it's often too late. So federal ed policy, ESEA, needs some shifts, such as bills like Senate 737 from Senator Jackie Rosen that's emphasizing more STEM support and computer science support at these early ages. It's fabulous. Because right now ESEA continues to emphasize mathematics and literacy so much that many districts have honestly limited emphasis in the elementary levels on anything else. And current research has found that rich learning in science and social studies is critical for literacy learning, but they remain often their isolated silos. And so we need to better support integrated learning and need to figure out also how to mitigate this feeling that all subject areas are in this competition for time instead of figuring out how they support and develop each other. So fourth, there's got to be some shifts to title with flexibility and professional development that we see in title programs. Title I, which I've seen repeatedly when I've been a teacher, ends up with kids using programs that really just aren't that engaging or fulfilling. And they're using these What Works Clearinghouse, research-based programs. But the research behind them is often funded by the companies that make the products. And we need more flexibility there to bring in some thoughtful possible connections to science and STEM, even within the Title I funding. Title II, would love to see some shifts there so we can go back to supporting in Title IIB and Title IIA, some directed professional development for teachers. I know in Wisconsin and other states I've talked to, for example, the real sustained professional learning for educators in science and STEM and mathematics that's connected to university partners has almost completely gone away because of those shifts to Title II. I would note that Title IV has some amazing things in there for STEM funding, which is really fabulous, though that aspect of Title IV isn't prioritized by districts as much as I'd like to see. And we could really use some more examples of how that funding has been effectively used at those Title IV funds. Next, and it can't be emphasized enough again, equity always. Everything underlying what we're doing needs a stronger emphasis on equity and access. For the most part, we are not in the US making good progress in supporting kids from underrepresented groups. We're not closing opportunity gaps. And of course, there's no easy fix. We've got to have some systems thinking to make that happen. Finally, in innovation, I don't see federal policy currently really supporting innovation at scale. So for example, in the state assessment space where I live in Wisconsin with science assessment, there has been some allowance for innovation. There are too many constraints and not enough supports to really get much uptick there across the states. And current large-scale assessments just continue to drive what's emphasized in the classroom, which ends up being mathematics and literacy, and aren't consistent with the full vision we have for our children. So that's my quick time to start here. Thanks all for your time, and I would welcome any follow-up discussions, and on to our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So next up, we have David Stroup, who is Associate Professor of Teacher Education and Science Education at Michigan State University. David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Kevin. I love following the K-12 person. I was a middle school teacher to start my career, so it's always nice to hear from the K-12 world. I appreciate the invitation from James and the STEM Education Coalition. It's wonderful to be able to talk with you all about pressing issues facing STEM in higher education, especially in the area of COVID. And I think I'm going to go through some things, and I have a slide to show you at the end, but I think one of the take-home messages too is that folks in higher education are here and ready to help policy people moving forward. So we need to have more conversations with you, and we're happy to think with you moving forward. I want to situate my comments in some important ideas, which is that STEM, it's always important to remember that STEM exists in social, historical, and political contexts. It's not separate from our human beings' sense-making of the world, including our biases and assumptions. So STEM was created by people, it's been changed by people, it continues to change. It's important to remember that not everyone gets to participate in STEM, and that's both pernicious and purposeful. So philosophers and historians and sociologists remind us that certain people with power, historically that's white men, have shaped the conceptual, the epistemic, the material, and social practices of canonical STEM. So STEM reflects the values and practices of some people, but not others. So given that context, let's think about two major issues of STEM in higher education during the COVID era. And the first is that we have real problems with the preparation of new STEM professionals. So as my colleague Dan Reinholtz notes, STEM bachelor degree attainment remains disproportionately low for students of color and has actually declined for women in many fields. Research also shows that STEM faculty have biases against women and students of color in STEM fields. These biases play out in classroom practice and in a way that often marginalizes women and students of color from feeling like they could and should participate in STEM. A second point about STEM in higher education and professionals is that success in STEM majors seems to be tied to a high grade point average or the ability to memorize and recite canonical information on some sort of standardized assessments. But the daily work of STEM professionals hardly resembles the coursework that we see in higher education. In the real world, in STEM, folks participate in shape practices together, they collaborate on teams, they work to solve problems with no predetermined solutions, they communicate with colleagues internally and all over the world. In other words, there's little coherence between how STEM work and cultures are presented to students in content courses in higher education and how STEM actually operates in the real world. So in sum, many students are denied opportunities to participate in shape STEM fields. And more broadly, schools in STEM fields either explicitly or implicitly purposefully create hierarchies of participation using race, culture, language, and economic class to limit many students' possibilities. The second major issue that I'm going to talk about in the COVID era is the preparation of new STEM educators. So I think if you have kids at home or if you've been hearing from your local districts, you know that COVID has really disrupted the preparation of STEM educators and has caused immense stress among current STEM educators. So between underprepared novices in the coming year and a surge of STEM educator attrition or retirements, I'm really afraid that we're going to face an imminent crisis of STEM education, namely, who's going to prepare the future STEM professionals? So I think we really need to invest in STEM preparation and continuing education, but we have to do a better job of preparing STEM educators. Teaching is not natural. I don't think people are born to teach. I would argue that teaching is a learnable profession that's supported by evidence-based practices and tools. Such practices and tools help teachers have a common language to plan and discuss teaching decisions. They enable teachers to embed principles of professional teaching into instructional activities, and they provide new and experienced teachers with a concrete foundation to begin and continue their careers. So importantly, we also have to continually disrupt potential STEM educators' ideas about STEM fields, about teaching, and about entrenched inequities that privilege certain knowledge and participation. But we also have to provide them with opportunities, with practices, with tools to rehearse teaching and to learn with and from each other, as Kevin was alluding to. Importantly, they also have to learn with and become embedded in students' communities. So I think higher education has a really significant role to play in the future preparation and support of STEM educators. So now I'm going to share a slide with you that has 3 concrete recommendations and some resources that you can actually draw from. That I'll put the resources in the chat, and then I will share my screen here so that we can see this slide that has recommendations and resources. So the first is that as policy people, I think you can really demand equity and justice in STEM education. And I would say that this includes both interrogating the knowledge and practices that are valued in STEM and helping current and future professionals work towards equitable and ethical STEM practices. I also think at a policy level, you could create incentives for higher education to track and improve equity. The second immediate need is that we need to incentivize ambitious and equitable STEM teaching. So pre-K through graduate education, STEM fields, they're not a closed system. They're really connected to each other. STEM work and STEM education are highly related. We need to provide support and incentives for educators in higher education to shift their instruction. We also need to help new STEM educators take up an ambitious and equitable STEM teaching. And finally, we have got to recruit and support new STEM professionals and STEM educators. So think 100K in 10 during the Obama administration. I think we might need another initiative like that, where we're going to have a huge effort to recruit people, but we're also going to need to support their ongoing learning. We also need a stance as a country, as Kevin's pointing out too, that we have to value STEM education. We have to value STEM preparation. We need concrete supports, but we need as a country to say we value STEM professionals and STEM education at the higher education level. So again, thanks for your time and the resources that I put are in the chat, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone if they have questions.
Thank you, David. So next up, we have Shanda Hinton, who's Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Executive at Raytheon Technologies. Shanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So it is a pleasure to join this session today. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I've been asked to share some perspective on STEM in the workplace and overall workforce trends. The needs of the workforce are clearly changing. As I think about over the last year, nearly every company has had to do and had to completely reimagine how it operates and how it employs its employees, and how it supports their employees to collaborate. Many of us are now just embracing flexible schedules and structures for the first time in our careers, and for the most part, we'll continue to do so for the foreseeable future. This change happened so quickly and unexpectedly, and we've all had to embrace a change that perhaps we weren't ready for. What that means is that as a business, we've needed to look at the new types of skills employees need to operate in this new reality. Resiliency and agility will be just as important, and arguably more important than other soft skills moving forward. It also means we needed to invest in new technologies and training to support a more distributed workforce. All businesses have had to learn how to rapidly adopt and deploy new IT and communication technologies faster than ever before, and perhaps faster than budgets and IT policies would have typically allowed. And a third change that I see is an increased focus on employee well-being. The question, how are you doing, is taking on a new meaning in this day and age. Organizations need to increase their commitment to the workplace culture in a way that supports health and happiness and personal well-being, whether through new benefits or new learning opportunities, or increased accountability for leaders to regularly check in with their people. COVID is having just a significant impact on the diversification of the STEM workforce. As we think about the COVID crisis, it has surfaced unprecedented challenges, and the impact to diversification of the STEM workforce will be felt, I think, for years to come, and it may take nearly decades to recover. The COVID pandemic has clearly amplified earlier inequities. Historical barriers and challenges for underrepresented groups have been just exacerbated in this crisis. Even before the pandemic began, our progress around advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workforce, workplace, and the global economy had just been much slower than I think we all would like. And in many ways, because of COVID, it's been set back. So when I consider the impact, I think of a few things. One, working mothers. Working mothers have been disproportionately affected. As you look at some of the stats, U.S. working mothers are 1.5 times more likely than fathers to spend an extra 3 or more hours a day on household work, on childcare. That's equivalent to a half a work week, half of a full-time job. A recent study I was reading in McKinsey revealed that U.S. mothers with young children have reduced their work hours at a rate perhaps 4 to 5 times higher than fathers, so that they can take on these additional responsibilities. A recent article by Carol Fishman Cohen from iRelaunch cited that in 1 month between August and September 2020, nearly 1.1 million workers ages 20 and over dropped out of the labor force. And of those workers, over 800,000 were women. So we also know from research that over the last year that 1 in 4 women are considering downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce altogether because of COVID-19. So these stats means that companies need to be on the ready to support these women when they return back to the workforce, and then when they look to rejoin the workforce in the years to come. At Raytheon Technologies, we have a long-standing commitment to our Re-Empower program, and it's a program designed specifically to help experienced professionals relaunch their careers following a 2 or more year career break. 70% of our hires to date in that program have been women, and 85% of those hires have been engineers. Now, we're already having conversations internally about altering the profile of that program. And instead of having a requirement of 2 or more year career break, really shifting the focus to talent who have perhaps 1 or more year career break, because there's going to be an influx of talent ready to return, and we all need to own our power to support making that happen. There's also changes in the pipeline of students, STEM students entering the workforce that's impacting national security and the supply of clearable U.S. employees. So while employment in STEM, occupation has grown, about 80% over the last 30 years, the pipeline of STEM students entering the workforce continues to be a challenge. And you've heard a few stats from David earlier, and I'll add a few additional. But last I looked, only 20% of U.S. high school graduates are prepared for college-level coursework in STEM. And there's a disproportionate impact, particularly on middle school girls who express interest in engineering, science, and math. So close to my heart as a mother of a daughter in middle school. Usually about 7% of middle school girls express interest in STEM, yet only 1% actually choose a computer science as a major. So there is such opportunity to really do things differently as a country, as a business community, to ready students in a new way. We know that students of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID due to an outsized just lack of broadband connectivity and devices to participate in remote learning. And this means it's going to be just long-term impact, again, for decades to come. Relative to the impact on national security and the supply of clearable new U.S. employees, we find that as we work to recruit incoming students, there's a popular sentiment that a clearance lifestyle is not desirable. So students view jobs that require clearance as things that will not sometimes can be conducive to their lifestyle. That they view that clearance jobs as having reduced flexibility in the workplace, perhaps fewer social encounters, adherence to strict requirements in order to maintain their security clearance. So to change this perception, we need to fundamentally alter our approach. We need to not only continue to focus on building the pipeline of students in STEM, but we also need to begin to craft a new narrative around careers and national security and those careers that require clearance. We need to focus on the purpose and the pride such careers deliver and the enduring impact that those careers have on the world, as well as the opportunity to be a part of some cutting edge technologies. So early education is key. Visible examples of what these career paths look like, particularly in underrepresented groups, is also key. I look forward to having some additional dialogue and look forward to questions that will come as we continue today's session. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to James.
Thank you very much, Shanda. So next we have Kathleen Martinez, Senior Director, Global Education and Employability at BP. Kathleen?
Hi. So can you hear me okay? Wonderful. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here and speak specifically about STEM and the work that we're doing right now and how COVID has impacted us. Specifically, I was asked to address a question about how companies are adjusting to COVID in regards to talent recruitment and also corporate philanthropy. At BP, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but last year in February, BP rolled out a new purpose and plan, which meant that we were reinventing the company. We are committed to being net zero by 2050. With that, obviously, comes ensuring that there is a just transition and that we do have talent that's capable to help us get to net zero and help get the world to net zero. And so last year, when COVID approached and impacted all of us from one day to the next, we had to very quickly shift and pivot and be creative, because around that time is when we have a majority of our internships coming on board, our interns coming on board. We have a lot of summer STEM programs and engagement with our BP STEM ambassadors. All of those things were acted, and we had to be very creative. And I'm very excited about what we had to do in the face of the challenges, because some companies were not able to still offer their intern opportunities, and they had to rescind those internship offers. And at BP, we were very clear and very determined that we wanted to do that. How were we going to potentially have virtual internships? And we were able to do that, and we created virtual internships, but we didn't want to just do an internship that was just a generic, just checking the box. We wanted to make sure that it was a value and that these students were actually finding ways to have real value-driven projects and that they were able to engage. We had several opportunities to work with them, to work with our leaders. I'm going to share very quickly. Let me see if I can. Maybe I'm not able to. Oh, here we go. I'm going to share, this is our internship journey. We created this internship map. We had opportunities for our to speak with our new CEO, Bernard Looney, and we created an website journey map. We had internalies where we would gather, make sure that the students were involved. Just earlier, we heard Shanda say that that the word "how are you doing?" "how are you feeling?" is very important. These students were feeling that as well. And so we at BP were just trying to make sure that we had responses that were timely and that they were sensitive to what we were dealing with around COVID and some of the closures and some of the shutdowns. We had virtual community service projects, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. But I just wanted to share that we really had to be creative in the sense of how we were going to do this. So we didn't want to stop recruiting, but we had to pivot. And we did this. We made sure our internships were strong and that our interns received all of the engagement that they would have otherwise received, that they were engaged with a mentor at BP. In addition, in the fall, We had all of our engagements with the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, the Society of Women Engineers, everything was virtual. And so we had to create a lot more virtual, digital, just projects and information, partnerships. Another thing that was, I think, really, really key is that we didn't want to walk away from a lot of our engagements. And so how could we make those work for us and still bring value to the students and still bring that connectivity into BP and into the students that we partner with? So, you know, we partnered quite a bit. We made sure that we had engagement with one-on-one mentors at BP. If we're looking at a younger audience, the STEM K through 12 field, we had significant increase in access to our STEM online resources, our BP STEM global resources, and also the ones in the US. We worked with teachers and with students. We did homework assistance and tutoring and mentoring with some of the partners that we already had. And so one of the things that I think that might be really beneficial is as we start looking at what's needed for the future, that we think about collaborations, and we're looking at what are the skills that we will need for a net zero world, or as we, you know, have an energy transition. These skills, as Sean mentioned, you know, the soft skills piece of it, the problem solving, the digital analytics, some of these other work frames are going to be more prevalent in who we are looking to hire. And so our teams across VP are looking at what are the skills needed for the future. We're developing skills clusters that are basically STEM plus some very powerful skills that will have an impact on a student's ability to be successful. And so we have a lot of partnerships already in the communities. What I would is needed is conversations, engagement, and collaborations, because as a company, BP, we want to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. We want to ensure that the future workers are ready for the next generation of innovative careers, and that they provide a good, sustainable wage. We also want to see that those employees are very much from a diverse background. That's another commitment that we've made at BP. And then just this past year, we launched a framework for action that had, you know, very specific measurements in regards to ensuring that we were focused on equity in every aspect of the company. In our STEM engagement, the majority of the work that we do are with underrepresented minorities and economically disadvantaged schools. And so I think that what I would say is I agree we need more supportive teachers. We take our employees into the classroom, because a lot of time there is a disconnect between what teachers understand about science, technology, engineering, and math, and what an actual career is. And so we're working with teachers to help understand what engineering means. And then one last thing I would say is, as our undergraduate recruiting teams are out there, we're working with our businesses to tell us where the demand is. And so we're looking ahead. And it's not just engineering anymore. It's engineering plus data science. It's engineering plus data analytics. It's evolving, and we need to make sure that we are looking at how it's evolving and keep up with that, and integrating it into the very young year. Maybe creating some type of a corporate public partnership with schools or with the federal government somehow, so that we have collaborations, and because we do have resources in our STEM ambassadors. And so I leave you just to say that at our company, at BP, we're really working hard to do what we can do in the face of COVID to support our communities and to support our employees. In my new role at BP, I am responsible for working internally to develop a global education and employability strategy around the world. And so we're looking very closely at our needs and our future needs where are we going as a company, and what are the skills that we need in order so that we are able to create a strategy that is a just strategy, and that we build the skills that are needed, but that we also provide a fair and equitable access to skilling and to livelihoods in the STEM sector. So what I would say just to close out is collaboration and conversation, very key. And I'll send it back to you, James.
Thank you, Kathleen. So our final speaker today is Levita Willis-Hale, who is the Executive Director of the Arkansas After School Network. So Levita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon, and thank you to my fellow panelists. I want to start by just really helping you to understand, when we talk about informal learning, we're talking about those after school and summer programs and those youth development experiences that are oftentimes community-based and or school-based. We are one of the 50 statewide after-school networks. We're supported by the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation and other partners to expand access to quality opportunities. And in particular, we're working with our STEM-rich institutions to broaden and expand opportunities for STEM learning. You'll see two banners behind me, and one says engage and the other says expand. And that's exactly what we've been doing in the out-of-school time field in Arkansas. And so I've been asked to address two specific questions, and I'm going to refer to my notes to do that. And so the first question that was provided to me was simply, how has informal STEM education been impacted over the past year? And in Arkansas and in other states that are similarly situated, 66% of what we call our out-of-school time programming is located within a school building. And this is because in a state like ours, where there may not be enough convenient location for out-of-school time programming, oftentimes the school building is the most convenient and accessible location to these kinds of opportunities. And since much of STEM learning in Arkansas has been built around an in-classroom experience, when COVID hit, we know that a lot of our students lost access and connection to critical STEM learning supports, such as technology supports, including broadband access and including hands-on instruction. And so, however, in Arkansas and in other states like ours, where there was one of the 50 state after-school networks, we launched our virtual learning platforms to include the Mizzen After School app that was supported by the Mott Foundation. We launched a virtual summer learning portal to support and engage students where they were, whether that was at home or wherever they happened to be. As a result of that, we know that we were able to expand and support learning. Unfortunately, the pandemic also exposed those gaps that we've already talked about. But those inequities among our children of color, our lower income students who were in more isolated, more rural parts of our state were hit especially hard during this COVID season. In many of our communities, our schools served as the hub for school meals and access to health-based services and many other opportunities. And so what did the out-of-school time field do in response to that? We served as critical connectors to ensure that not only did young people receive meals, so meal transport, meal access, we also worked to ensure that we were serving as connectors to technology and broadband access when there was no longer opportunities for children to be in school. Now, Arkansas, like some of our neighboring states, we're back in school for in-person instruction. But what we also realized is that we have not yet fully realized, what the impact of COVID-19 has done in terms of the sense of isolation, the sense of not being in their supportive peer group. And so as our programs came back online, we know that we had to rebuild the sense of belonging and community. And so we continue to think about how do we make sure that not only are we focusing on those critical academic learning gaps, but how are we supporting those social and emotional needs during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And so the second question that I was asked to address was, what role do after school and other informal programs play in the recovery of education post-pandemic? And so after school and summer learning programs also provide unique opportunities for individualized career exploration through job shadowing, through apprenticeships, and hands-on learning activities like coding and robotics. I'll also put a plug in our state. Arkansas was one of the leading states in terms of coding and in requiring coding as an elective opportunity in K-12. We have been working to expand those opportunities beyond the classroom. And so working with national organizations like Girls Who Code and Code.org to make sure that we have those kinds of opportunities in those programs. In addition to this, we know that the experientially based activities are really important. We know that that classroom curriculum is important, but we know that it is equally important that young people have those hands-on developmental experiences. And so one of the things that we know that we're going to have to ramp up, which has been already mentioned, is this notion of 21st century skill building, such as critical thinking, creativity, communication, teamwork, and leadership. And we know that after school and summer programs are a critical part of the education infrastructure and education pipeline to ensure that we are imparting those critical 21st century workforce skills and exploring those careers. And we do this, and it's already been mentioned, but I really have to emphasize it as well. At the national level, our statewide after-school networks partner with our national chamber organizations to ensure that we're working with business leaders so that those informal opportunities to connect to job shadowing, opportunities, apprenticeships, and mentoring, that we're making those connections to be that bridge to business, community, and school. We're also thinking right now about a recovery summer. And we talk about a recovery summer, we're really talking about academic, but when we think about those STEM skills, particularly in the area of mathematics, we know we have yet to understand the scale of what's been lost, but we know we have to address this. But the question becomes how we address this. And so we can't just assume the posture that traditional academic rigor alone will be enough. We think that we also have to address this through those social and emotional learning supports that go hand in hand and boost academic achievement. So this is what we're saying specifically. If we think about what we need to be doing, our hope is that we won't rush to simply recreate what we thought was the norm pre-COVID-19, that we really want to think about the science of learning and development and really think about that experientially based creative approach to learning and development that has been the mainstay of informal learning for more than 200 years now. And so what are we saying? We want to make sure that our students feel connected and supported, that we help students and parents and schools in determining what students have missed, where the gaps are. We need to think critically about what those assessments are and in determining where our students are in terms of baselines. We're providing bridges to school instruction that supports skill building in math and literacy and in all forms of STEM in general. That we are consistent and we're being, in terms of informal educators, a consistent access point for resources. And again, that we're thinking about trauma-informed care. And we know a lot of our children have suffered emotional losses. You know, they may have lost parents. They may have experienced the loss of a loved one. And so we know this has a cumulative impact on the well-being of children. We have to address that as well. So what does this mean? So after school and summer programs will continue to serve the community and be a hub. And we really strongly think that the 21st Century Community Learning Center program, which is a federally funded after school and summer learning program that's a part of the Title IV, Title IV-B in particular, that these opportunities need to be expanded so that we're reaching more students. And across this nation, for every one child that's in an after-school program, there are another 2 who are waiting to get in. And that's simply because of a lack of funding. So we really need to think about that funding stream at the federal level. And so after school and summer learning programs provide immediate and long-term benefits. We know that there's a connection to these early opportunities. Someone talked about middle school girls, and we know the key is starting them early, staying with them, and building that sense of agency, that sense of connection to a STEM career has to start early. We also know that we can help parents support their children in getting connected to these resources so that students can not only feel as though they can do it, but they want to do it, and they have a greater STEM identity for working in a STEM field. And then what we'll be doing this summer is really creating those partnerships at the local level as a network, continue doing that work so that these programs have the resources that they need to ensure that our young people not only catch up, but that they thrive during this time of COVID-19 and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Levita. So thanks to all of our panelists. We've got a few minutes here at the end to entertain some questions. We have a ton of questions from our audience on YouTube and also the participants here. And I want to pick up on a theme that's been mentioned several times, both while we were talking and by our speakers here as well, which is what I'll call sort of the general area of the nexus of the STEM fields and social and emotional learning and social and emotional factors that are sort of governing our strategies for making people feel included in the STEM fields, attracting them, retaining them. You know, I feel like in many ways there's an emergence of this as a theme in the same ways that 5 or 6 years ago, we started to see a real convergence in informal learning and this general recognition that STEM education wasn't just what happened in the classroom, it was all of the things around the classroom and in other learning environments and museums and out of school programs. And you've seen the convergence of those fields. I really feel like what I hear is a common element that everybody has mentioned is that there are these social emotional learning factors that are in many ways our lack of understanding and using those type of adjustments effectively is impeding how we're making the STEM fields broader, more inclusive, more widespread, and more effective. And here's my question to panelists. How much of the challenges in this front are a matter of do we have best practices that we just need to deploy more broadly and more consistently and really emphasize? And that's sort of the breaking down barriers piece of this. And secondly, how much of this are problems we don't really understand how to solve, and we need research and innovation and pilot programs and new efforts to sort of explore and understand some of the challenges we don't yet understand. So let me start, Shanda, let me start with you first. Just what would be your response to that? How do we divide this up between what we understand and we just need to get after, and how much of it do we really not understand and we need to do a better job?
Yeah, I think we understand. I think we understand and we need to get after it. And I think where there has been barriers and where it has impacted our ability to accelerate progress is that we've taken a siloed approach to the issue versus a systemic, multi-pronged approach. And so it is all of the things that we've just described. It is K through 12 education. It is after school reinforcement. It is equipping parents in a new way to support their children in a new way, to create excitement about STEM education in the STEM field. But then as students transition to the workforce, it is ensuring that once they get to the workforce, that it's a workforce that is equipping them. It's a workforce that is creating a connected tissue. It's a workforce, I always like to say, if you can see it, you can be it. It's a workforce that as you come in, that you see leaders who look like yourselves, who are performing at a high level. So I think the issue has been the silo approach, but it's that multi-pronged, that connected tissue, I think, that is going to accelerate progress. And thus, that's why I'm so excited about today's conversation and the opportunity as we think about new policies that can support corporations in working more effectively with educational institutions. And new policies and practices that can enable the STEM field and education in a new way as we move forward.
So, Kathleen?
I couldn't agree more. Shonda said it exactly as I would, I think, and probably better. One of the things that we've done is this past year is we built this framework for action around race in the U.S. and within our own workforce to make us very, very specific around what needs to happen at BP in order to advance equity and diversity. But one of the things that I was thinking when we were talking about this systemic multi-prong approach, that's absolutely true. We've got a lot of great best practices out there. But everyone has been working in their lane or in different areas. I think a cohesive, collaborative, systemic multi-prong approach, like Shonda said, is really what is needed here. We need to be working together in order to move this forward. It's too large of an issue for any one of us, anyone, an educator, a teacher, a university, a corporation to move this along. So I do think that there is an opportunity there for us to build some type of a cohesive approach moving forward and do it in a very strategic, actionable way so that we are measuring progress and we are moving the needle and that we're not just creating another exercise. I think that that's really important. One last thing I'll mention, and as we were talking about after school, one of the things that I'm first generation high school and college graduate. My parents could not help me with my homework, even if they wanted to. In this world of a global pandemic, we've got parents at home or working if there are essential employees and they cannot help their children. And even if they wanted to help their children, they're not able to maybe help them with algebra or supportive measures. Teachers are doing as much as they can. There is increased digital divide, as we talked about, because maybe there's one computer in a household of 7 people. And so but we can't, again, answer or solve these questions alone. So at the end of the day, all of the things that we've talked about today have to come together, and we can't do it without the support of the federal government and a strategic alliance and increased funding so that we're working, we've got a roadmap that is moving us in the right direction.
Thank you. So we've got a couple questions from the audience I want to work in here. So I'm going to shift gears. So Patty Curtis from the Department of Education has a question here. Would love to hear more about communities prepared to offer extended summer learning to address COVID education losses. So Levita, let me first turn to you on this.
And so, because we have an infrastructure of programs in each state, and that configuration may be a little different in each state. But the first thing that I would say is, I don't know where that question came from, but you really need to connect with your statewide after-school network in your given state. Because in each of those states, those networks are providing training, professional development, facilitating connections and partnerships. Some of those programs may be run by or funded through the State Department of Ed. Some of those programs may be locally driven from a school district perspective. And so the first access point will be the out of school time or the after school network. And if you're really thinking about readiness, most of the states have connections to the National Summer Learning Association. They're advancing those best practices for summer learning and engagement. And so it really just depends on what your access point is. But I would say connect through your statewide after school network. We say after school writ large, but we're really talking about after school and summer. And we have gone deep in each of the 50 states to ensure that we are not only advocating for local resources, but we're working at the state and federal level so that there is no silo, trying to make those connections. And so it's really not up to just the school alone to provide these summer learning opportunities. It really has to be about what the community comes together and decides how they prioritize this. I'm in a very rural state. We're just about close to 3 million people. And we have a huge gap in terms of access. And so we're working to fill that gap. But quite frankly, we have to make sure that we're all coming together collectively to let our policymakers know that these resources could be braided or aligned in such a way, especially now, to meet those needs.
Thank you, Levita. So I want to get to one other question, which we got from one of our YouTube audience members, Jeff Remington from Pennsylvania. So he's asking, can you talk about some of the obstacles that have arisen over the course of the last year under COVID to partnerships between corporations and other outside business entities and both K-12 and higher education? What are some of the new barriers that have emerged over the last year? And is there anything that the federal government can do to address them and make that kind of collaboration easier? And so I'll turn to Kevin and then David.
Thanks. I think that just establishing those open communications line is the key first step with corporations and businesses and those industry partnerships. But I would actually lean toward yielding my time to Kathleen or Shanda, who have a more direct experience with those industry partnerships in leading them with their organizations.
Well, so anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we have encountered barriers per se. We've sustained our commitment to driving action in this space. What readily comes to mind for me is, at Raytheon Technologies, we actually made a new multi-dollar investment in the Alabama School of Cyber Technology as a way to prepare students for government and industry jobs. And so, I'd say that I'm seeing both from Raytheon Technologies and many other organizations a renewed commitment to this space. And so any way that government officials can open up doors and take advantage of this opportunity that exists today with many organizations, I'd say to pursue that because I do see a renewed sense of commitment.
Kathleen? You're still muted there, Kathleen.
Okay, there we go. I think that, and if I understood the question correctly, and could you repeat the question?
Sure. So here's what I'm trying to get at. Are there any barriers that have arisen over the last year as we've all dealt with COVID for partnerships between companies and outside business interests, and whether K-12 schools or career and technical education or higher education that you think federal assistance in some form could address?
Okay, so the one thing I would mention, and I think you kind of froze there, so I hope you all can hear me. I would say,
yes, or perhaps eliminate those barriers.
Oh, there we are. Thank you. I would, the one that comes to mind the most is around technology and digital access and actual technological tools, digital tools to make sure that there is equity. We know that there is need there. And we did what we could. We partnered with CompuDopt as a business around COVID time to make sure that there were students who needed a computer, who got a computer. So BP donated computers, employees donated computers, but that was a big need. And there were some areas that were able to address that a lot faster and in partnership with corporations. But I think that that's one area that I would ensure that the federal government policy looks at is how do we ensure this digital divide and access and equity reaches our students so that they aren't further distanced from achieving that that foundation of critical skills and being able to actually be effective in school. So I think at this time, I would say that would be the area that I would ensure there was additional focus, dollars, money, and that at the end of the day, that there is a way, because I know that it was interesting, and this is a story, I'm not even going to say which state it was, but as we were partnering with CompuDop, there was a state that found 300 laptops in a warehouse that it was an educational, so then we had to update them and get them out or whatever. But let's all work towards being, very much proactive and taking advantage of opportunities and not just getting technology and sitting on it or whatever, but making sure that things get out there and that we're working together to find solutions. So if you don't need them in your city, perhaps there is a neighborhood that could actually benefit from that. So technology access, digital access, equity is where I would place that ask.
So we've got time for one more quick question, and I'm going to direct it at David. So one of our audience members asked, what role do historically Black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions play in STEM education and public school education? So David, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, that's a big ask, but it's a wonderful question. And, the quickest and easiest way to answer that question is that they have a lot to offer and they need to be purposefully included in the conversation. So I would say, if you're a policy person and you're putting a committee together, or you're trying to figure out funding priorities, or you're in conversation with granting agencies like the National Science Foundation or National Institute of Health, that you purposely reach out to colleagues at HBCUs and MSIs and you make sure that they're part of the conversation. There's a lot of wonderful things that happen there, and typically they're just shut out. And so certainly give them a seat or multiple seats at the table and really value their input and their advice whenever you're designing policies or funding.
Thank you for that. And let me just thank our audience members and our panelists and everybody watching us on YouTube. Thank you very much, and good luck to the 117th Congress, and you'll hear from us again soon. So thank you, everybody, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
you guys.